Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Pain Hustlers. Let's talk about it. So Pain Hustlers is directed by David Yates, who is more commonly known as the Harry Potter director. He has directed quite a few Harry Potter films, as well as all of the Fantastic Beasts films, controversially. And he did recently reveal that the Fantastic Beasts franchise is pretty much on hold at Warner Brothers, which isn't very surprising considering how poorly they've generally been received. But anywho, clearly David Yates saw the writing on the wall and decided to venture into a new avenue. And Pain Hustlers happens to be at least the third project in recent years to delve into the topic of the opioid crisis in America. Now, the previous projects to delve into this topic have been streaming shows. For instance, we had Dopesick by Hulu a couple of years ago, which starred Michael Keaton, Will Poulter, and Caitlin Dever, amongst others. And that was a very highly acclaimed series. It won a bunch of Emmys, and I actually checked it out after the Emmy nominations and saw for myself how brilliant that series was. More on that later. But then, more recently, we also had Painkiller, which was yet another Netflix production, this time a series delving into the same topic, although I think from a different perspective. I actually haven't watched Painkiller, so I'd be interested to see the differences between the two shows, but it seems as though both of them have been very positively received. And so Pain Hustlers had a tall order when it came to following up those two previous projects. And so the question is, was this movie able to stand out from the crowd, add anything new to the conversation that's already being had quite successfully? No, no, not really, unfortunately. Yes, in large part, I would say that Pain Hustlers wasn't as successful as having this conversation as the previous two projects that I mentioned were. But I actually didn't sit down here today to review Pain Hustlers just so I could crap all over it for about 10 minutes. I'm hoping that this review is nice and short. I actually wanted to talk about some of the good sides of this film because I looked it up, okay? I looked up the movie. I was like looking for something to review for this week because I was like, I'm supposed to be back giving you guys reviews, and yet there's nothing to talk about. There's literally nothing to talk about. And this was before I saw that The Killer by David Fincher was out in cinemas, which I did see, and I am going to review it. But this was before then, so I was like, what am I supposed to do? Well, lo and behold, here comes Pain Hustlers to put me out of my misery, or so I thought, because when I saw the reviews for it, I was like, oh, do I even want to watch this? But I was determined. Okay, I was determined to check this film out regardless. And I have to say, I kind of disagree with the reviews, guys. Now, I haven't read the reviews specifically. I just saw the Rotten Tomatoes number and was appalled. But I have to say, this film ended up being substantially better than I anticipated. And I think the increasing IMDb number speaks to that as well. But I still would not put this in the same sort of league as the previous two projects that have delved into the topic of the opioid crisis in America. But before we touch on the negatives of this film, let's talk about some of the positives, shall we? So just to give you guys a bit of a background, this film has a different approach to tackling the topic of the opioid crisis. Instead of Dopesick, which kind of delves into this crisis from different perspectives, from the perspective of the doctor, of the patients, of those who are selling, the medication. This time around, we predominantly look at the perspective of the, pill pushers, essentially. These are people in America who are representatives of the pharmaceutical companies, and it's their job to approach the doctors or the health centers or pain centers in America in order to get new clients for their drug. So this story centers on Emily Blunt's character, who is fictional, and she's called Liza Drake. And at the beginning of the film, when we meet her, she's working at a strip club. She's down on her luck, doesn't have a lot of money, and needs to support herself and her daughter. So she's doing whatever it takes to do so. But clearly this is not the position that she wants to be in. It was kind of bizarre seeing Emily Blunt kind of act out that scene. You could tell that she didn't really belong there. Not because the character didn't belong there, although she felt that way as well, but just because Emily Blunt the kind of actress that you would expect to see swinging on a pole, you know, like it's different. And so that kind of took me out of it. I was like, I don't know if she's the best casting for this kind of character, because she has that kind of, I don't know, like upper middle class Britishness to her. So it took me out a little bit there. But for the rest of the film, her performance is really good. So I feel like I settled into the character over time. But anyways, with this opening scene, you're at the strip club and you see her clearly not wanting to partake and clearly not having the talent to partake either, quite frankly. But it's here that she meets Chris Evans's character, Pete Brenner, who is a representative for the pharmaceutical company, which I believe is fictional, and I can't remember, is it Xanax? Something along those lines. But he's a representative and she's able to suss him out. They have this interaction that shows that Liza is, you know, she's intellectual, she's able to sense things, she has an initiative to her, and so he offers her a job and she chases him up on it when she's in desperate times, and so thus begins her career in the pharmaceutical industry. And at first it's all well and good because they're just chasing after this one doctor who's down on his luck and easily manipulated. But then it becomes clear that the way to really break into this market is to ensure you basically have a monopoly in an area, because the more doctors that you are able to get to prescribe your drug, the better it is for obviously the pharmaceutical company, but also for the appearance that, you know, the best drug is the one that the pharmaceutical company is trying to push. Because if there's other competitors in the area, then it makes it seem like it's a less effective drug somehow. Like it makes it seem like there are alternatives out there which the company doesn't want to portray. It's all really despicable, really, really horrible, and like stomach churning. And that is why, even though we have seen several projects delve into this subject matter, I was still pretty forgiving, or not forgiving, but like receptive to seeing another story in the same vein, because to me this is just such an abhorrent practice, and it's so foreign to me as someone who's British, and like we have the NHS which is holding on by a thread, but it's still there for now. It's still there, okay? And so it's a completely different system here in the UK, and the idea of, oh gosh, these pharmaceutical companies having so much of a hold on these doctors and being able to manipulate them to such an extent and corrupt them to such an extent is so foreign and so anger inducing and just so mind blowing to me that I actually welcome more stories like this. So I was, you know, really open to seeing this story unfold, and I think that's what put me in a better headspace to receive this film and not look down on it so much as some of the other critics did. Another positive of this film was Emily Blunt herself. Now, I did say at the beginning it was a little jarring seeing her in a strip club swirling around the pole. I'm like, Emily, what are you gonna do? Emily, what's the plan? What are you gonna do here? Okay, you do not belong, okay? But yes, you know, Emily Blunt was able to kind of disappear into the role as time went on, which I liked. The character of Liza is really, really interesting because she is the single mother who wants to support her daughter, but she's also someone who is very ambitious and she doesn't want to give up on her dreams. You know, she has this mantra that she says to herself when life is getting particularly tough, and I kind of empathized for her during those moments. And another element to the character that helps garner empathy is her daughter who's portrayed by Chloe Coleman. Chloe Coleman portrays Phoebe, who's Liza's daughter, and she has epilepsy due to a bundle of nerves in her brain that's causing these, I think, like aneurysms. It's a huge problem that she's facing, a medical problem, which of course in America means a very costly problem. And so there's different layers to this. In fact, there's different avenues that they could have taken for this as well, because I presumed that Phoebe would end up dependent on the painkillers that Liza was pushing on doctors, but it went down a different path where Phoebe just needed surgery due to the kind of bundle of nerves in her brain that were causing her to have seizures. And it was really like shocking and heartbreaking to see Phoebe have those seizures. I think Chloe Coleman did a really spectacular job acting that out. I don't even know how she could have, summoned that within her body to do that on command, but I thought it was really, really convincing. Although I'm not someone who suffers from epilepsy myself, I would say that, having that dynamic, that mother-daughter dynamic, definitely helped the character of Liza for sure. And I think both Emily Blunt and Chloe Coleman were able to sell the mother-daughter dynamic really well, to bring some humanity to the character, which was very much needed, because ultimately you have someone who, I said before, she's a protagonist, she's an antagonist in this story, because she is partially the reason why you have this widespread outbreak to begin with. And aside from Emily Blunt's performance in this film, all in all, the cast was pretty good. I would say especially Andy Garcia as Dr. Neil, the founder of the pharmaceutical company here, Catherine O'Hara as Liza's mother, who's this like kooky, wacky character who obviously depended on Liza to get a job and to start earning the big bucks. But they have a pretty complicated relationship, but that gets a little bit of screen time to further develop the character of Liza and the relationships with people that she has in her life. But yeah, I always welcome seeing Catherine O'Hara in anything, and she was really great here as well. And she ended up having a very pivotal role at the end of the film, where she was able to supply some evidence against Dr. Neil to help put him away in prison. And that was really great as well, being able to see the head of the pharmaceutical company actually face some consequences for his actions. And even though in this film you have fictionalized versions of events, they do show some clips at the very end of the film of real life events that took place that inspired this story. As I said, pretty much the whole cast is great. You also have Brian Darcy James, who portrays Dr. Lydell, and he is the down on his luck doctor that we meet at the beginning that ends up being corrupted by the pharmaceutical company, and he ends up prescribing this hardcore opioid drug that's supposed to be for cancer patients, people going through like stage 4 cancer actually, but just pain, so much pain in their bodies, and that's why they need this huge drug. But he ends up prescribing it to people who have like headaches and migraines, and people who have like, arm injuries, like people who just do not need a drug that is this intense and this high dosage. But because he's getting money, he's getting bribed by the pharmaceutical company to do so, he's starting to wear the Gucci, he has the hair transplant, like he's started to buy his own hype. He is deeply corrupt, this man, okay? He has failed the Hippocratic Oath, absolutely. And so he ends up becoming part of their scheme. And eventually he also gets his own comeuppance, which is great to see. But he is just, again, a fictionalized character that represents the doctors in America who are committing these very real crimes and who are kind of falling into the traps of the pharmaceutical companies, whether it be willingly or not. Now, I've talked about pretty much everyone on this cast except for one guy, Mr. Christopher Jamal Evans. Chris Evans has had a really rough time of it post Marvel. I can't believe how hard it's been for him to move on from the Captain America era of his career. But it's been tough out there, and the pandemic didn't help, and it's been really hard. And it's kind of ironic because one of the reasons why he decided to ultimately, join Marvel and become Captain America is because RDJ convinced him that, once he had this on his resume, he would have the name recognition to do anything else afterwards. He would kind of bring in a built-in audience from his days at Marvel. But unfortunately, that hasn't really worked out. And so it's like, oh, sorry to say, but this is kind of another flop for him. I'm the only one singing its praises. Everyone else is like, yeah, I hate this film. And that's kind of the same for The Grey Man as well. Like, oh my God. I really liked that film and no one else did. Anyway, so listen, even though it's kind of peak that Chris Evans is going through this right now in his career, my heart isn't really bleeding for him because so far, in the projects outside of Marvel, his performances have not been given. His performances haven't been given the way that I think they should be giving, especially considering how desperate he should be for a success. I think he was actually good in The Grey Man as this antagonist. He was playing against type, like being the anti-Captain America, which was fun. And I think he was good in Knives Out as well, again doing a similar thing, playing against type. But here, I mean, again, he is an antagonist playing against type once more. I mean, at this point, like, are you even playing against type anymore? But I don't. He wasn't able to blend into the role the same way that Emily Blunt was. Like, I just kept seeing Christopher Jamal Evans. Like, I just and there was nothing that bad wig with the dodgy lace front and that fake facial hair could do to stop this. I'm sorry, but there was nothing that the hair and makeup department could do to save it. Like, I was so sorry. And also, oh my god, the voiceovers were so cringe. He doesn't have a voice for voiceover. I can't believe I'm just sitting here crapping on Chris Evans, but like, he does not have a voice for voiceovers. I'm so sorry to say. I also saw The Killer, as I mentioned earlier. I saw that film yesterday, and most of that film's dialogue actually is voiceover work by Michael Fassbender. And this is a man that has a voice for voiceovers. Okay, this is a man that sounds good. Like, the pipes are coming in clean through the Rode mic. But Christopher Jamal Evans does not have that same. He doesn't have that same quality, I'm sorry to say. So I think it was a poor decision to have him do so many voiceovers. It's supposed to be this sort of like mockumentary setup. So he's speaking from the future in these moments. But yeah, his voice just ain't cutting it, I'm afraid. sorry about it. But this is another dud from him. And it's peak. I mean, the film isn't terrible, but he's also not the best part of it. So like, I don't know what to say. Even me who's defending it is like, oh. But okay, that's pretty much as far as my defense can go. In terms of the shortcomings of this film, like I said, it just doesn't meet the standards of its predecessors, of its previous projects that have also delved into the topic of the opioid crisis. First of all, I think it was a mistake to have this film center on the pharmaceutical representatives pushing this drug on doctors and therefore on clients. These aren't sympathetic people. They're the bad guys. As I said, they're the antagonists in the situation. Like I said, they do make an attempt to humanize the character of Liza Drake by, giving her this daughter that has these medical needs. So it wasn't painful watching her story, and in the end she's very sorry. Like, she's very remorseful. Oh, she's so sorry for what she did. She went to the Oppenheimer school of being sorry for her terrible actions. She's sorry. But ultimately she ends up getting prison time as well, and rightfully so. And then we see at the very end she's just fine because she ends up opening that natural beauty cosmetics company with her mother that she intended to do so from the beginning. She's fine whilst there are hundreds, if not thousands of people in her local area who have died due to their addiction from the drug that she was pushing, and not to mention the thousands of other family members who have suffered during that time. So I don't know what the moral of the story was. Because of the perspective that they chose to take, it's difficult to follow the messaging of this story without it just constantly contradicting itself. And also, like I said, a major difference between this project that centers on this topic versus the previous ones is that the previous ones have been series, and therefore they've had more time to really do a slow roll on these stories and really explore how these things kind of build up, how these doctors, initially could have good intentions prescribing these drugs to their patients because they want to help their patients and they want to see improvements, but then over time it just becomes so much more malicious as they get corrupted, or as patients become addicted, and it just infests an area like this plague of addiction and dependence until the entire area, the entire neighborhood is just taken down by this freaking drug. Those other projects are able to demonstrate this process nice and slowly because they have more time to dedicate to it. Whereas when you have a 2-hour film, you kind of have to compress all of that within the 2 hours. And not to mention, you're centering the story on the drug representative, so a lot of time is wasted on just us feeling empathy for the wrong person. And lastly, aside from the topic at hand, which like I said is very hot, very topical and really fascinating, especially from my perspective coming from the UK, where we have a completely different healthcare system, although not for much longer. Aside from all of that, and just taking a look at the filmmaking, David Yates' directing, this is a pretty bog standard film, I'm sorry to say. Like, this is pretty, it's a Netflix movie. It feels really forgettable, it feels really generic, and so of all of the different ways and directions that David Yates could have taken this very same story, I think he just went about it in the most generic, bog standard way possible, which also doesn't help it stand out from the crowd of really great projects that are tackling the same subject matter. And I guess on the flip side, it makes me respect and appreciate Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon even more, because it could have ended up just like any other generic streaming movie, but it certainly did not, and clearly that's quite a feat. But still, even with these negatives, I had a pretty good time with this film. I mean, not a good time because it's a sad subject. I would say it was an okay addition to this conversation, but nothing like the previous projects, especially Dopesick, which I actually watched, and that impacted me for ages. I was thinking about that series for weeks. Really just, it was so hard hitting, and it really just affected me. And this film is nothing like that. It's not on that level. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Pain Hustlers a 6 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Pain Hustlers, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie, if you watched it, down in the comments below. Or if you've watched any of the other series or projects delving into the opioid crisis, let me know what you thought on them as well. But yeah, please be sure to subscribe to my channel to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.